Hey, I have internet speed again. Sorry about that, folks. Cox Roanoke is not a quality provider. Been really frustrated since I moved. Okay, so sorry about that, folks. Let's continue on. All right, Doug's. That's a good question. So, like, does a legendary land really factor into that discussion against back to basics? I think it does. Like, it matters slightly less than some of the other ones. But like if you have Caracas in play in the early game, like say you lead on like Caracas Bile or something like that in the early game and it gets tapped out early, like it still definitely matters. All right. So I would consider trimming a mom in the stack list. All right. Looking at the two drops, I still am okay with one Revoker, I think. Like it's not really good against Grixis because like they just have so much removal that it is not a reliable way to shut off planeswalkers. And like a lot of times I'll end up like boarding Revokers out anyway. Against Miracles, similarly, like yeah, it can shut off a Jace or sometimes another random planeswalker that they have. But like it's not a card that you want to play in the early game. It's a card that like you would love to tutor up for if things go wrong. It's fine against some of the other stuff that's here, but it's still weak against some of the popular decks. Like it's somewhat weak against Eldrazi. It's good against Sneak and Show. It's weak against Dredge. It's still pretty weak against Reanimator. Yeah, so I've talked about this on stream a few times, but the Sneak and Show matchup got a lot harder once they started playing a whole bunch of copies of whatchamacallit, Omniscience. All right, looking at the 3-drop slots, I sort of want a third recruiter in the main deck. I don't like. I usually haven't been a fan of that in the past, just because I think it can slow down the deck a touch. But I've been seeing a handful of lists with 3 of them in the main, and I could probably get behind that. Like with the exception of a handful of combo decks, Legacy is pretty darn fair right now, and it might be okay to put the third into the main deck that I've been playing in the board if I want to hedge more for Miracles and Grixis and such in game 1. I don't know that I'll 100% do that, but it's something I want to consider. I still want to have this Hollow Spirit Keeper for like the Grixis matchup. That's a great bullet. Mirror Crusader's pretty fantastic. I don't know how I feel about this guy right now. Yeah, I don't think we need Cavernous Souls. I think the last time I played Cavernous Souls, I swore at the computer screen a whole lot. So the upside of Sanctum Prelate can be pretty high. The downside is that sometimes it's just a 2/2 that can't really attack all that safely. Like against Miracles, like sometimes if you play it, you just don't attack with it because you're scared of like Snapcaster Mage acting as Ambush Viper. And similarly, against Grixis Control, it doesn't really lock all that hard. So I don't know that I'll end up wanting to play this. Like I'll probably put it in the 75, but I might be comfortable moving this back to the sideboard. Isn't an Enlightened Tutor's side with a toolbox any good? If Legacy is relatively fair, then Enlightened Tutor isn't really all that great. It's when Legacy is overwhelmingly unfair and you need a whole bunch of narrow answers that it becomes good. Enlightened Tutor is also pretty bad when you're also playing Chalice on 1 all the time, which is something that I still definitely want to do. So I'll probably want to move the Prelate to the sideboard. And let's see, how do we feel about Walking Ballista? Walking Ballista is pretty good against like these top 3 decks. It's like a fine turn 2 play against Delver if they just go like Delver or Young Pyromancer or something like that. Just like having it as something that you can play on turn 2 if you happen to draw it is great, and in the end game it can be pretty solid. In this meta, I could see 2 Jailers main. That card has insanely overperformed for me lately in humans. I don't know that I want 2 in the main. I definitely want 2 total. Like, like it's something that I could try out. I'm not opposed to that. Let's put that on the maybe list. Like 2 4-drops is a lot for this deck. Like I'd probably rather run a 3rd recruiter that can find the jailer than just outright run the 2nd jailer. Yeah, Doug's. I'm actually surprised there's not more like true name floating around. What's the Stoneblade percent sitting at? I think it was about 4%. Yeah, Stoneblade's sitting at about 4%. Looks like it's done pretty well in like the Legacy Preservation series. It's gotten finishes on Moto both in the last 2 weeks. Top 8 of a 1K. How big was that 1K? Probably small local event. Yeah, only 30 players. I am live and I'm in the green. So if there's a problem, please try to refresh the page. Okay. So okay, great. I'm glad. So let's consider these changes. So like, what if hypothetically I cut a mom? What if I move this to the sideboard? What if I move that to the main deck? That would still leave me with 1 main deck slot open. So I swap Mom for Recruiter, and then I could have 1 slot open. Cataclysm main deck. That seems ambitious. Like, I'd love to run, like, Chalice main deck, because, like, it comes down sooner than this does. But, like, I have too many 1-drops in game 1 to make that viable. A Glow Rider. It might be time to consider some of the like cards that I was playing in previous iterations of the deck. That like have now gotten cut. So let's scroll through some of Phil's collection of bad white cards. So I could see something like Vryn Wingmare being fine. Like D&T has fallen out of favor a little bit, so there's fewer Dread of Nights running around. So like this stacking with Thalia might be good again. Like it's awkward because it's not great against Baleful Strix, and that's like a huge problem card right now. So I could see like Vryn Wingmare being fine. Restoration Angel isn't out of the question. Remorseful Cleric would be fine. I could like play something in the main deck that very specifically hedges against Miracles or Grixis Control, and I could play something like a Brightling or a Brimaz in the main deck. I've basically never been happy with main deck Aether's-Horn Canonist. I've tried so many times. Yeah, if you're in a combo heavy metagame, like Vryn Wingmare is really sweet. Yeah, a couple of the D&T players have been recommending like the Cleric to me main deck again, which I don't actually hate because actually that might be correct. In a lot of the game one scenarios, like if you have a tutorable piece of Graveyard Hate, you can steal games versus Dredge. And like the whole reason I cut this from my deck was because more decks were playing Dread of Night when we like had the premiere of Death Shadow Delver around PTA 25. So I could see this going back into the main deck, and this helps like make the recruiters better too. Yeah. All right. Yeah, I have to respect graveyard decks probably a decent amount. Um, like just like looking at previous lists that I've played, like I think I ran like literally 2 pieces of Graveyard Hate when I cashed the GP, and that was just insane. Yeah, the worse your opponents are, the better Spirit of the Labyrinth is. 100% true. Okay, so Paladin in Beck. I have registered Paladin in Beck for legacy events before. I've stooped that low. Yeah, it happens. All right. So, like keeping in mind what we want to be. We want to have a good plan for control. We want to have some cards for Delver still. And I want to be well prepared for maybe like Eldrazi, Sneak and Show, and Dredge slash Reanimator. I don't really need to prepare too much for depths because whatever I have will probably be good against them. Yeah, so, all right, let's talk about Ballista for like 30 seconds. Against Grixis control, it kills Baleful Strix and gets all that stuff out of the way. Against Delver, it picks off early threats. Against Miracles, if they do something like Jace and Minus, you can just like play Ballista for 2 and kill the Jace. It's reach against a lot of decks. Randomly will kill Death Shadow Delver players. Like it's got some stuff going for it. You worry about the card being frail though, especially in this Grixis Delve. So you don't play Walking Ballista expecting that it stays around forever. You play Walking Ballista expecting to get about 2 things for it, and that's good. Like there's some times where you get to like play it patiently and just like, oh, put on a counter, kill a thing, put on a counter, kill a thing. But a lot of times, like you just treat it as like a 4-mana 2-for-1, and that's good enough. All right. So one thing to consider when building sideboards is that if I want to keep Dredge in mind specifically, Walking Ballista is essentially a graveyard hate card because on 0 mana you play it and it kills all of their bridge from belows. So that's something to keep in mind. Phil, I'd like to know your thoughts on Orum's Chant either in the main or 2 of in the sideboard. I would never play that card in the main. I haven't played that card in the sideboard since like 2012 or something like that. Yeah. Yeah, it is great against Storm. It's damn great against Storm. But I think Chalice of the Void is a better card as a whole. All right, so looking at this sideboard, if I'm thinking about the Dredge matchup specifically, this sideboard would have 3, 4, 5, 6 pieces of Graveyard Hate if we count Walking Ballista as weird Graveyard Hate. That's okay. And now I just have to like kind of think about what I want to do. So one of the decks that's currently on the rise is 4-color Loam. And like this is something that I want to be aware of. It's a matchup that can be kind of hard. and just having another card to shut off like the Punishing Fire, Knight of the Reliquary side of the deck can be useful. And it's a card that has some utility elsewhere. Almost always in the past, Rest in Peace has been a 2 of in my sideboard. I might want 1 now. I don't know that I'll have room for 2. And I also don't know that I'd want 2. Awkwardly, though, like in the Reanimator matchup, Chalice of the Void and Surgicals are going to come in at the same time, and that's going to blow. I've never gotten to like Violin the Ballista on stream. That's on the to-do list. All right. I don't know that Ballista 2 is going to get to that. All right. This is the tricky part. So right now, I clearly have too many cards that I want to play. So what do I really want this card for? I want this card for like Ant and Show and Tell, and then it's okay against Grixis and Miracles, so it probably stays. But I'm going to have to make some cuts somewhere. And I'm not really sure where that somewhere is right now. Yeah, Land's metagame percent is pretty small right now, right? Yeah, it's 2% and going down. So I'm not like going to overly consider lands in deck building, but like it's a good point. It's very good there. All right, how much of this is visible? Okay, so I can still do another row of the sideboard. All right, so I'm going to want about 3 heavy-hitting cards for the control matchups. And I think with Death Shadow Delver on the decline, it might just be correct to play Cataclysm over Gideon. And it like pains me to say that because I really like Gideon. But it's probably just correct to just cave and do this. And I think like Kata Jailer is probably better than like Kata Gideon, just because like Jailer can come in as removal against the creature decks as well. Yeah, so like I'm not gonna cut this from the 75, I don't think. But I'm gonna have to make some cuts somewhere. All right, what's Leon and Relic Warrior good against right now? Not a ton, but when it's good, it's very important. So it'd be super important for the D&T matchup. And some of the other fringe stuff that I'm seeing here. Like the D&T plus Stoneblade percent together is probably high enough that I want to flip that, keep that, but maybe I can hedge. Oh yeah, I wish I could be playing Knight of Autumn. That card's so good. All right, then how's Path to Exile right now? So Path to Exile is very good against Delver, and then very good against like Eldrazi, and very good against the Depths deck. All right, that probably keeps its slot. What about Council's Judgment? Good against Grixis, good against Miracles, medium against Delver. Very good against like Stoneblade. No, probably need to keep that around as an answer to True Name. Maybe I need to like shave down to 2 chalices, but I just really like the math behind having the 3rd. Yeah, so I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but there's a very noticeable difference in gameplay for when you're running 3 versus 2 chalices and just like being able to deploy it very early on. And if I'm gonna like lean on chalice as my generic combo hate as well for like blue spell based decks like Sneak and Show and such, then like I really want to have 3. So I think I need to make a choice about whether like Ballista 2 or Rest in Peace 1 is better. The second Ballista is really nice against Dredge. But maybe, like, with 3 Recruiters in the main deck now, maybe I could cut that. I'd be kind of doing a horizontal turn for, like, keeping something that's good against the Dredge matchup, but making it something that's objectively more powerful, and then giving me more flexibility for matchups like Maverick and such. Yeah, I do agree. Rest in Peace is not amazing right now. Like, that being said, it's still the best at what it does by a lot. So, Fairy's fine. If you start out with a Vile hand, then you play Vile in 1. When you get to 3 mana, you hardcast Recruiter, and you get Containment Priest instead. And this hits those decks a lot harder than Fairy does. Like, Fairy has the upside of being, like, 100% usable on turn 3. And, like, Mize's Reanimator in particular. But Containment Priest is a harder game over card. And I think I value that more than the surprise of Fairy. I've always been of the opinion that Fairy is extremely powerful versus, like, Black-Red Reanimator specifically, and then kind of mediocre against a lot of the rest of the format. Alright, so let's assume that something like this is going to be our deck list. I'm going to take 30 seconds and just like get this deck list up on Cardboard Live so that we can have this on screen while we're doing sideboarding. By the way, huge shout out to Cardboard Live for taking down the Pro Tour. That's so huge for them. Super happy for them. All right. Do. All right, there. Deck list is updated. Trying out 3 mobs is to hedge against control, essentially. All right, so this is kind of like the end of part 1 of this stream. Part 1 was like, let's look at some data, let's build a deck list. Part 2 is let's build a sideboarding guide and see if what we're doing is going to work in terms of in and out numbers. Because Because a lot of times when you throw together a deck list, you're putting together a pile of things that you think is going to work, and then sometimes you're wrong and you don't have the right number of in and outs, or it makes some of your sideboarding awkward, and so you have to make some changes to it. So this is a rough sketch, right? And I might find that I'm really lacking in some of my numbers for matchups, and I'm going to need to make some changes. All right, so we're just going to go through this in the order of like how I had it for my last tournament, and we'll see how these go. So let's assume that we're going to play against like Death Shadow Delver. So previously, I was doing -1 Jitte, -1 Prelate, which isn't here, negative a Revoker, and this was the one that had like a play draw difference. And then on the play, I was like doing -3 Thalia, or -1 Thalia, -3 Flicker Wisp. And I was going +2 Paths, but now I only have 1, +2 Council's Judgment, +2 Gideon that isn't there, +1 Jailer. So is this the same thing I would do with this 75? I'm definitely light on cards for Death Shadow Delver if I were to play this deck list. Like, I'd end up having to keep more Flicker Wisps in, and on the draw, I was very frequently, like, boarding out all of my Thalias. And now it might be that I'd have to, like, change how I played the matchup a little bit and hedge less against Dread of Night if I played against it. So, a weakness of this deck list is that by playing Cataclysm over Gideon, I would be short 2 cards for the Death Shadow Delver matchup. Awkward. Alright, but we said we think that's on the decline. Alright, so let's say that I was going to play against, like, Rug Delver instead. Actually, let's not even, like, talk about that. So let's just go, like, right to Grixis Delver. So I probably want to cut, like, Revoker. I'd probably want to cut my Recruiters just because they're slow. That'd probably be about it. And I'd want to play, like, Path, Council's Judgment. I probably wouldn't board in the second Jailer out of fear of True Name Nemesis. I'd really like a second Path for this matchup. Yeah, it's looking like this deck list is going to be short cards for, like, Delver. Well, that's good to, like, realize early on in this process. Maybe that second Ballista does need to get back into the board. Like, the second Ballista would give me 1 more card to play here as another removal spell. All right. So this is probably the point where I have to make a choice. Yeah, so there's a difference between, like, being light on sideboarding against Delver and, like, just frankly not having enough cards to replace the bad cards in our deck, which is especially relevant if I'm also going to be, like, trimming one mom to hedge more against control by having, like, the other Recruiter in the main deck. So I either need to, like, start boarding Chalices for Delver, which seems poor, or I probably need another Path on the sideboard. And that path needs to come at the expense of probably either Palace Jailer 2, Chalice 3, or Sanctum Prelate 1. I think the 24th land is invaluable. Would not consider cutting it under any circumstances. Like, especially if I'm going to play like this other recruiter in the main and a bunch of 4-drops in the sideboard. Like, just hitting your mana and being able to like consistently do your game plan, I think, is very important. All right, what about this jailer? So the second jailer is not going to be amazing against Grixis Delver. Like they can have Young Pyromancer, they can have True Name, both of which are pretty good against that. It's going to be very good against Grixis and Miracles, except when it loses you the game. It's very good against Depths, very good against Eldrazi, very good against Sneak and Show. All right, maybe I don't cut that. This is why this is a process. So with this, I have 4 sideboard graveyard hate cards, 1 main deck hate card, plus Ballista that's kind of another 1 versus Dredge. I'm very aware that 3 Chalice is a loud statement. And here I am, very hesitant to remove number 3. I'm kind of leaning towards cutting this and seeing how I feel about it. It would mean I'd lose a tutorable hate card for the Ant and Sneak and Show matchups, though. Yeah, that's like... It feels bad to cut some of these bullets. The whole reason this Chalice sideboard worked for so long was because I was able to cut so much graveyard hate. And now if I'm forced to respect the graveyard decks again, there's a lot of tension in the sideboard. The 3-drop with a long name is Hallowed Spirit Keeper. It's a 3/2 that when it dies, you get X/1/1 white spirit creature tokens with flying. All right. Maybe I'm not supposed to play a Rest in Peace. Maybe I accept that I'm trying to steal some game 1s against Dredge by putting this Remorseful Cleric in there, and that it's more important to hedge against Miracles and Grixis by having these Chalices, the Cataclysms, and the Jailers. It doesn't feel great. And maybe I'm supposed to, like, cut the second Jailer instead. But let's try this. So now we have 1 more removal spell for against Delver, so that I can board in 4 removal spells for my weaker cards. Hallowed Spirit Keeper is something that a number of us in the Discord have tested quite extensively for the Grixis control matchup. It's very good. It's on par with Mirroring Crusader with higher potential upside. All right, so let's proceed forward now. Let's try to think about sideboarding for a couple more matchups. So let's assume we get paired against Miracles next. So I probably want to cut these 7 cards just because like I'm going to bring in these chalices. So you don't really want to be playing the mom game. So I think before I was doing like 8 cards. I think I ended up cutting like something resembling this. And then I was bringing, so against Miracles, I would bring in Council's Judgment, Cataclysms, Jailers. All right, so this one works. So I just probably keep the Mirren Crusader in the deck and then cut these 8 cards. Oh, 9. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, so that's 9 for 9. That's perfect. So let's think about Grixis control. Yeah, so like siding Spirit Keeper versus siding out Crusader is gonna about be the same thing. They have annoying white-based removal, so it might be better to play Crusader. But every once in a while you get into these weird spots where they're forced to chump block, and then you make an army. Sorry, one sec, I have to take this real quick. I'm potentially picking up someone from the airport later tonight. Yeah, so that's the sort of situation where if your opponent goes and casts a Supreme Verdict and you get to like violin a Hallowed Spirit Keeper or something like that, you just like win the game on the spot. So like there are some potential upsides of playing Hallowed Spirit Keeper in that matchup, even though it's not objectively amazing. Yeah, this is the other reason why I'm not just like playing leagues tonight, where I might get like stuck playing randomly for an hour for one match that goes long. I have to have the flexibility to stop the stream when I need to tonight. All right, the Reanimator matchup will be super awkward for sideboarding because like I'm going to be bringing in like Chalices and Surgicals and Containment Priests and maybe Paths as well. So that one's a mess. So I'm not even going to like do that one. Let's try something like Eldrazi. So against Eldrazi, I'll want to be able to like probably pull my Moms and pull my Thalias, and most of the rest of the stuff's probably fine. So this is like 6 cards that are very actively good against Eldrazi. Yeah, that'd be fine. I could keep like 1 Thalia. All right, that works out. All right, what about like the Mirror? So if I was going to play the Mirror, I'd want to be able to pull out like these absolutely terrible Thalias. And then other than that, like most of my main deck's like pretty acceptable for the Mirror. Usually you don't end up sideboarding too many cards there. So it would depend on like whether I'm like play draw and what exactly my opponent's doing. But like I have plenty of options that I could side in for the Mirror. So I'm not really worried about that. I'd probably end up sideboarding about 5 cards. Path's awkward. I play Cataclysm versus Eldrazi post, but not regular Eldrazi. Yeah, so we'll probably be fine for the Mirror. Usually you want to have like 5-ish cards for the Mirror, because usually you're pulling out Thalia in the main deck Sanctum Prelate, or maybe like something like a Spirit of the Labyrinth. And like similarly, Hallowed Spirit Keeper is something that's kind of medium in the mirror that I might pull out. So if I was gonna like board 5 cards, I'd probably do something like this. Although like maybe on the draw, I'd consider the second path. It's just super awkward giving your opponent land. Ramping your opponent in the mirror is terrifying. All right, what else is like popular that I haven't talked about yet? How about like Ant? So against Ant, I'd want to pull like Ballista, Jailer, Swords to Plowshares. Probably want to pull out my Jitte, and I potentially want to pull out a couple of 3-drop creatures. I'll just grab like 2 Flicker Wisps to represent that I'd want to pull a couple of 3-drop creatures. So I'd have Chalices, Prelate, Surgical Extraction, Leonin Relic Warder, and then potentially some Council's Judgments to hedge specifically for Dread of Night. So I'm more or less good for that matchup. I like Crusader versus Ant. Like, it just hits hard. And sometimes that's what you need. Like, you play a Hate Bear, and then you just need something else to help you close out the game. Flicker Wisp is pretty medium. It's pretty hard to, like, get to the point where you're at, like, you have a Vial on 3, and you're using it to, like, blink out one of their lands so that they can't, they like, have, like, 1 mana less than what they need to go off or something like that. Whereas Crusader's just something you just, like, tap out for on turn 3 and go, like, all right, here's the clock. All right, so what about like depths? That's something I haven't talked about. So against depths, I'd have Jailer, Path, Path, maybe not Chalice, maybe Prelate, maybe these cards. So I'd have plenty of cards that I could bring in. So like, what's not stellar there? I play against Ant quite frequently. Still no love for Sword of War and Peace. I mean, I love that card, but it's probably not right now. So, Sword of War and Peace is really good against the mirror and really good against miracles. And when both of those things are extremely popular, it's a very good time to play it. It's just not like the best against Grixis control, and I want most of my cards for the Miracles matchup to overlap with Grixis control. Yeah, but similarly, like, Sword of Light and Shadow isn't, like, super amazing versus Miracles. Like, it can give your stuff pro-white, but it's rare that you actually get anything back from the graveyard, and it's also rare that the life gain matters, so it's just a sword for protection colors. I have not scheduled the stream with Cyrus yet. He has agreed to it. It will either happen in like maybe late November or early December. That will be announced well ahead of time so that people can go and like make sure they're there for it if they want to see it live. Oh yeah, Sword of War and Peace overperforms against Stoneblade. Most certainly. Would you be interested in streaming with Patrick? Patrick who? Oh, Eternal Weekend winner. Patrick, I see. So he plays Miracles. If I was going to do a Miracles stream, I'd probably ask like Anurag to do it, or maybe Min, just because like I know them better. Like I will make better content if I know the the people that I'm streaming with, just because like we have that camaraderie. So that's not a no, but usually I tend to ask people that I know at either personally or through the community pretty well. Yeah, so if I was going to play against Depths, I feel like I have a decent number of cards that I can go and bring in. So that's fine. So a lot of this other stuff is going to be fine. Reanimator 1 would be a mess. The Loam 1 would be a mess because, like, in that matchup, you do lean a little heavily on your rest in pieces. So probably like play like Cataclysm, Surgical, Relic Warder, Judgment, Jailer, Prelate. So I'd bring in like 9 cards. Nine's still a lot. And I do have the main deck Remorseful Cleric that I can tutor for to muck with graveyards as well. So that's probably still fine. No, I didn't really talk about lands. Like, lands and Loam would largely overlap in a lot of ways. So I'd play, like, Surgical, Cata, Prelate, probably Jailer, maybe Paths over some Swords, and maybe a couple of these effects. I'm not even though I'm cutting some of my best cards in like the rest in peace, I'm still not worried. Like, I still am going to have plenty of cards that I can bring in for the matchup, so it's probably fine. This pile over here was for was when I was talking about Turbo Depths. So against Turbo Depths, like, your Stoneforge package is super slow and clunky, and you just want to be doing things that are more impactful or just like directly start attacking their life total. So that's what that was for. It's not necessarily for all of these same matchups. Sorry if that was confusing. That was on me. Hey Phil, I've never been big on Prelate, and I haven't had much success for it. I feel that it gets worse without Cavern, and I think you can free up a main deck slot. Yeah, so I moved Prelate over to the sideboard, actually. So I agree. So, like, in the main deck, I trimmed a Mom, and I trimmed the Prelate to play a Recruiter of the Guard and a Remorseful Cleric. Oh, Jailer. I've had pretty good experiences with the main deck Jailer. It's just a really nice bullet. Like, it's a tutorable piece of removal. You know, it's a tutorable one-sided Howling Mine against a lot of decks of the format. It gets you out of a lot of spots that no other card can. And so I think just, like, having it there to hedge against a lot of weird spots is fine. But I can understand not liking this card. Like, I had a lot of really negative experiences with this card. So, like, if we look at the metagame breakdown again, like, in game 1 against Grixis and Miracles, like, there are some times where you can play that early and just ride it to a victory. There's some times against Delver where they play out, like, one big threat, like Garmag Angler, and you know, end of turn, Violent 3 Recruiter, get Jailer it, and you've won the game. Similarly, like, just having something that you can put in off of a show and tell to eat a big creature, like, there are edges that it gives. Yeah, 100% on board with 24 lands. I've been super happy with the 24th land. I don't think I want to go back anytime soon. Just having more ability to work with your equipment and, you know, a greater ability to, like, play 4-drops in your sideboard or, like, curve out more of the time, I think that's very important. If I were going to change anything about the mana base, I would consider playing like a Mishra's Factory over Port 4, but Port's a really good Magic card. Like, Mana Denial is a really good way to just steal games versus Grixis Control and Miracles. And, like, it's very good against a lot of other things that are here. You know, Depths, Ant if you have a Vial, you know, Eldrazi, Sneak and Show. Port can buy a lot of time, so I don't think I'm going to make any changes to the mana base. So this is kind of my process for going through and thinking about sideboarding and like how to build a deck and looking at some data in order to help you reach those decisions. One of the things that I hope was clear is that like building a deck for an event or for a specific time in the metagame can be really difficult. Like going into this, I wanted to hedge more against graveyard decks than what I'm doing right now. Like, I wanted to have one more card in this sideboard. Like, I wanted to have a Rest in Peace in here as well. But then when we looked at, like, how the in and out numbers were working for the Delver matchups, it became clear that I really needed one more removal spell for that matchup. And so, like, you have to decide, you know, where are my moments, where am I going to fight, where am I willing to give up those points? And so hopefully, you know, having Remorseful Cleric in the main deck will do enough there to make the matchup reasonable overall. Yeah, no Rest in Peace is weird. Since that card was printed, I've almost always had 2 in my sideboard. It's just so absurdly powerful. But a lot of the decks right now, like, Rest in Peace isn't as good against them as historically they might have been otherwise. So, like, historically, you had a bunch of decks like Shardless Bug that were super reliant on the graveyard, and it became hate for those mid-range matchups. But things like Rest in Peace are only kind of medium versus something like, say, Grixis Control. So, I don't know. If I had a 16th sideboard card, it would be Rest in Peace. I'm just, like, not super willing to cut down on a Chalice here. It might be more reasonable to play, like, 1 Rest in Peace over this Chalice, but I think I want that extra, like, 10 or 12% to have this in my opening hand for the Miracles matchup. Yeah, Rest in Peace also is a non-bo with Hallowed Spirit Keeper, and Hallowed Spirit Keeper is one of the ways that we want to, like, pound on Grixis, so that's something to keep in mind as well. So even if I had Rest in Peace, I might not board it in for those matchups anymore. So Bill, I actually don't think Karakas is a good card against Miracles anymore. Like, protecting your Thalia is great and grand sometimes, but, like, I am in constant fear of Back to Basics just ripping me off of my mana and preventing me from playing Magic. So Ancient Tomb is always something that's in the back of my mind, and there's a Reddit tournament report today. Doug's was playing with 1 Ancient Tomb in his 75, I believe. I don't really like Ancient Tomb in this deck list in particular. If you just kind of like take a look at some of my mana costs here, I have a ton of white cards both in the main deck and in the sideboard, and Ancient Tomb is much better when you're playing like white and 2 colorless cards. So just to like take a look at this, like if you're playing a bunch of like Vryn Wingmares and things of that nature in your flex slots, or like Thalia Heretic Cathar, where you can play them a turn earlier, I think like there's a super huge advantage to running Ancient Tomb as like a one of. But if you play that, it probably needs to come at the cost of like a Rashadan port. So no, that's my loan list. Every list I've played in, I don't know, I think like the past 4 or 5 months has had 24 lands. I'm very sold on 24. Okay, so if I was going to like go and do this sideboard guide properly, I would have been writing all of this stuff out in a document, and I would then print this off and physically bring it to the event with me after making all of the numbers, like making sure that all of the numbers work. So what I've done here is just kind of like sketch it out for you all and kind of show you the process of how I'm thinking about these things. This was something that was done, kind of quickly. It's not like my authoritative sideboard guide or anything like that, but it was just meant to kind of show you, like, am I going to have about the right number of in and outs for each matchup? And I think more people should sit down and do that sort of thing. So this is the deck list that I'll try out and see how it goes. Like, maybe I'm going to feel that the third recruiter is still too clunky because I'm running into Delver too much and it's not great there. Or maybe I'll feel like I really do want that mom back in or something like that. So there's likely to be small tweaks to this still. And I may find that like I'm wanting some effect once I play some more games with it. I might jam this against some dredge and then realize like, I really do want one more graveyard hate card. Because I did also cut that walking ballista, which was sort of like another functional piece of graveyard hate for dredge. So I've still got things to think about. I want to open up the floor to chat for some questions now, whether it be about like the metagame, D&T more generally, or anything like that. If you have any questions, chat. I'm going to go ahead and field those now. And while you're taking a minute to type, I'm going to see how things are going. Trimming the mom was to hedge against Grixis control and to hedge against us playing a whole bunch of chalices in the board. The planes and snow-covered plains are for when you play against the card Predict and they target you, because those two cards have different names. Did you notice a resurgence of High Tide recently? I played against it a lot in the free matches. They're free matches. They're people messing around with deck ideas to like learn how to play them. So the free matches tend to be filled with like people trying out combo decks that they can't really like solitaire by themselves effectively. So I find that the free matches are A, filled with worse players, and B, filled with much more combo and people trying out those random brews. Now, Brightling's great. Brightling is a card that I would love to have in the deck. Like, I adore that card, but I think there's just too much Baleful Strix in the metagame right now. When Baleful Strix comes down, I'm going to be 100% back on the Brightling plan. It's just so awkward against Baleful Strix. Do you think cards like Mangara, Thalia Heretic Cathar, or Burn Maz can make a return? Mangara feels slow right now, and like it's acceptable versus Miracles. It's rough against Grixis control because they're just going to kill it. It's like it's not like 2013 Legacy anymore, where a lot of decks are just like literally playing like 4 Lightning Bolts or 4 Swords of Plowshares as their only sources of removal. So like the Mangara lock just isn't as reliable as it used to be. How do you feel 4-color Loam compares to D&T as far as matchups against the field? 4-color Loam is probably a touch better against Grixis control and Miracles, but it's a super dog to some matchups. Sneak and Show in particular is a really abysmal matchup. That one's very hard, almost unwinnable. I think 4-color Loam is a very good deck right now, though. It's probably underplayed due to Tabernacle. What's your opinion on Spirit and Labyrinth in the current metagame? As a whole, probably a good card, but it suffers from the not being able to get into the red zone well syndrome that many other cards suffer from. And like Grixis Control has so many removal spells that even if they're not cantripping, they'll find one that can get rid of it. Yeah, 4-color Loam is also very hard to play. Very, very hard to play. And that's me saying that, and I'm a very, very experienced Legacy pilot, right? Like, I know my stuff, and I even still just, like, pooped myself plenty of times in my first couple of weeks playing that deck. Is Tabernacle necessary for 4-color Loam? Yes. If you want an optimal tournament deck list, Tabernacle is 100% necessary. I think that is unquestionable. Like, you can play the deck without it, but it's so much worse. That card is so important for answering problem cards. Like, it answers a young Pyromancer that got out of control before you found a removal spell. It helps you beat True Name Nemesis because you literally destroy all of their lands and you make them sacrifice True Name. Yes, that happens more frequently than you would think. What performed better in the meta? Mono-white D&T or red-white? Mono-white. There's almost no splash build D&T running around right now because of back to basics and miracles mostly. Thalia Heretic Cathar seems medium. Like, it's kind of annoying for Grixis Control, and it doesn't really do a ton against miracles. Like, if you kind of look against some of these top decks, it's very good against some of them. Like, it's good here. It's okay against Delver if you're on the play. It's great against Depths. Then it's kind of medium against a lot of this other stuff. Very good against Eldrazi. I've never been a fan of Thalia Heretic Cathar. Alright, I should say, since better cards have been printed, I haven't been a fan of her. Like, when we first got her, she was insane. And then we got, like, all the greatest toys in the world, like Hallowed Spirit Keeper, Recruiter, the Guard, Palace Jailer, Sanctum Prelate, and I feel like her spot in the deck kind of got pushed out. If you're messing around with Ancient Tomb, she becomes much better. Yes. I think an Eldrazi and Taxes or white Eldrazi deck is certainly viable in the current metagame. Like, Chalice is great. Like, a lot of those cards are very powerful right now. The question is, like, is that deck going to be better tuned than just colorless Eldrazi? And I don't think very many pilots are working on that, so the answer is probably no. Overall, how do you feel D&T is positioned in the current metagame? If you are very good, and you have made active changes to your deck list to adapt to the metagame, D&T is still a fine deck choice. More generally, in Legacy right now, I think the best two decks are Miracles and Grixis Control, and I think it's not close. And then beyond that, there's everything else. So I think, like, the tier 1 right now is Miracles and Grixis Control, and some of the other decks that are doing well just punish both of them. So Dredge, for example, just, like, really craps on those two decks, and, like, you almost always get game 1 against them. So I think that's kind of what leads to its success. I'm probably not going to timestamp this video with all, like, the individual matchup breakdowns, because I really only kind of, like, talk about each matchup for a minute or something like that. It's not meant to be an exhaustive guide or anything. It's meant to be me, like, showing you my thought process. Goblins is a fine deck choice. It's not tier 1 or anything, but it has some really great card advantage that probably makes it stellar versus Grixis Control and Miracles. It would probably be a fine, you know, Maverick or underdog pick to bring to a tournament. As far as, like, Goblins versus D&T go, the matchup got a lot harder. How do you feel about Batterskull right now? So, I don't love Batterskull versus Miracles and Grixis Control, but it's super important versus Delver. So, I don't want to cut it. and I also don't want to play a fourth piece of equipment in the deck right now. So I think it falls into the camp of necessary evil. What do I think about Devout Lightcaster? I tested it very extensively, and I came to the conclusion that it's garbage. It was very, very good against Death Shadow Delver, but not nearly as good against Grixis Control as you wanted it to be. We've got a good old-fashioned bit race going on down there. JD, short version, it's very good against Death Shadow Delver, not as good against Grixis Control as you think it would be. Whew. All right, that was quite the stream of questions. All right, chat, do you have any other things you want to ask about D&T? No Planeswalkers in the board. You have to make in my opinion, you have to make a choice about whether you want to play Cataclysm or Gideon. Gideon is the more general card. Cataclysm is the more narrow but more powerful card. And if I really want to be gunning for Grixis Control and Miracles, then it might just be correct to play Cataclysm. Thoughts on Reanimator in the current meta? I would not be willing to register Reanimator myself in an event at this time. If I wanted to play a graveyard-based combo deck, I think I'd want to play Dredge. Like, Reanimator is very, very powerful, but I think enough people are on to the fact that graveyard-based strategies are picking up in Steam that I don't think I want to be there right now. Do we have matchups where Vial maybe isn't the best thing in our 60? Vial's usually the best card in your deck in almost every matchup. About the only time I cut it is against Nick Fit, because like they both ramp you and have Pernicious Deed. Just like the hands where you have Vial versus the ones that you don't are totally different. Alaman, no, I wouldn't consider Flagstones because I'm running Kata. But that's largely because Back to Basics is a card. Back to Basics is like warping my deck building decisions. What's the usual number we set Prelate on versus Miracles and Grixis Control? I can't seem to make the correct decisions against Grixis Control. It's a crapshoot. So against Grixis Control, you pick either what you think your opponent has right now or what you are most scared of. Like, 1, 2, and 3 are all numbers that you can name in the Grixis Control matchup that shut off different things. I tend to shut off 3 more often than not, just because Culligan's Command is always such a beating. And like some of the Planeswalkers at 3 are as well, and like random Toxic Deluge or something like that. But there's other times where like you kind of get a read that they might have like an Edict effect, or you're really scared of him, and so you throw it on 2. It's not like light and day, like there is a correct answer. That's a matchup where it's conditional. Similarly, against Miracles, you make the choice of whether you need to name 1 or 6. 1 shuts off more cards. 6 makes it so that you can very safely extend onto the board. A lot of times it's dependent on like the rest of your board. So like if you have a Mom or a Chalice, then naming 6 can be very, very powerful because your opponent then has almost no ways to just take a creature off the board. Regular Vulpix or Alolan Vulpix? Alolan Vulpix is sweet. Totally Alolan Vulpix. Did you have some side bet going with Moxall? That's glorious. And Army of Thalia, thank you very much for the bits, by the way. I didn't thank you a couple of minutes ago. All right. So this is going to end sort of like the conceptual thinking about D&T portion of the stream. This ended up being an hour and a half. That was a little longer than what I thought it would be. But since a lot of people were asking questions about Loam tonight, let's do like a quick Loam deck tech to round things out. Let me get this all on screen. Because like I think a lot of people misunderstand some things about Loam, and this is kind of just some side information. So right now, this is what I consider to be the stock 4-color Loam deck list. This is Connor's deck list, aka Loamer Boy from the chat, Connor Falls, and I think it's very powerful. So the main deck is relatively stock. There's only a couple of changes that you can make to it. One of the things that some people have been doing is like playing Queen Marchesa in the main deck, which I think is incorrect. But I'm not going to get into why. And the other thing that might change is the split between Abrupt Decay and Assassin's Trophy. There's a lot of people who are going to 3 decays in 1 trophy instead of 2 and 2. But otherwise, like, this is the main deck. And essentially, the deck is a control deck. I think a lot of people get like focused on giant knights and they think like, oh man, that deck's so aggressive. They just wasteland you and then kill you with a big. But really, most of the time when you're playing this, you just like grind your opponents out super slowly with like Bob, Punishing Fire, Loam, and like either Cabal Pit or Wasteland or even just Tranquil Thicket Recursion or, you know, Liliana Plus while you discard Punishing Fires and lands off of Loam. So it's kind of like a control deck that grinds out large amounts of advantage over time, mostly with graveyard-based synergy. One of the things that's most overstated about the deck is how good Mox Diamond is in it, and it's like certainly the best card in the deck, but a lot of people sort of erroneously think that if you don't have Mox Diamond, the deck is garbage and unplayable, and that's very wrong, because even when you don't have Mox Diamond, if you just like ramp out with Green Sun on 1, and then you play out like an early Knight or Lily, that's devastating. Or if you do like the same thing, and then you open on like Bob and Waste You, or like Waste You and Loam or something like that, it's very powerful. So the deck's Green Suns are not really like Silver Bullet Green Suns. Like there's an Ooze and a Teague, but most of the time these are just copies 5 and 6 of Knight for game 1. 4-color, I Hate All of Your Permanents would be a more apt name. Yeah, it most certainly is. And one of the things that I don't think a lot of people realize is that for post-sideboard games, this deck completely changes into a different deck. So in game 1, most of the time you kill your opponent with a big Knight of the Reliquary. Like, that is the thing that ends the game. But more often than not, like, Knights either get trimmed or removed completely from the deck. And instead, you end up being a control deck that wins with Planeswalkers or effective Planeswalkers. So a lot of times in post-sideboard games, I'm actually bringing in 3 Planeswalkers plus Honorary Planeswalker Queen Marchesa, and I'm actually just looking to like destroy everything my opponent has and win the game over time with these Planeswalkers. So there's a lot of matchups where like Knight of the Reliquary is super bad, like against like Baleful Strix decks, for example, like Grixis Control. And you just like end up boarding these out, and you just play this super slow, even slower control deck. So I just kind of wanted to get that off my chest and kind of like talk about Loam a little bit, because I've been playing it quite a bit, and I recently watched Jim Davis's stream in which he spent half an hour crapping on this deck while playing against me, and he lost. And just like the number of things that he said about the deck that were basically like, yeah, you have to have Mock Diamond or your deck's unplayable. It was just really frustrating. I think this deck's extremely powerful. It's very good right now. I'm kind of on like the down tick, but for a little while there, my win percentage with the deck was like 73 or 74%. I hit a 5-0 with it that got published with it, and like 4 or 5 4-1s in a row. And it just felt very strong. I've gone 3-2 and like 2-3 and 3-2 in my last couple of leagues. So like the last 2 haven't felt great. But before that, I went on an amazing tear with the deck. Patrick Green said Ajani is unplayable in Legacy in his tournament report. Like, this Ajani? This card's great. I wouldn't cut this card from the deck. It answers so many problem cards. Like, if you're looking to attack this deck, one of the best ways to muck with it is to produce a large creature and have a smaller creature too. So the way you tend to get like big creatures off the battlefield is just like clear them with Liliana of the Veil's Edict effect. But when your opponent goes and plays something like a Gurmag Angler and then like has some other thing that they could sacrifice as well, that becomes a problem. And so Ajani lets you tap down that creature and keep it tapped for a long time, and I think that's a super important angle of attack for the deck. The Lightning Helix mode also just like wins games sometimes randomly. Like I had what was supposedly an unwinnable game against I don't know, I forget, it was like Miracles or something like that, where I just thought I was dead, and then I drew Ajani, and it was like, well, I guess I Helix that Jace, and then I take over the game. Oh, everything's okay now. So here's the thing about the Loam versus D&T matchup. In game one, things are kind of close, and it kind of depends on like what sort of draw you have versus what sort of draw your opponent has. In the post-sideboard games, they get to play like this super hateful deck. Like, they have 2 sweepers in these, 3 more Planeswalkers, Knight of Autumn to mess with our equipment or vials, Tabernacle to make us pay a bunch of mana, Source of Plowshares as additional good removal, and they get to pull out some of the things that were kind of weak in the first place, like Chalice of the Void. So their deck can become very good against this. So like you can pull Chalices, you can pull Teague, and you can kind of like trim some stuff that might get hated out, like you can trim some Knights or something like that, maybe some Green Suns, and you just bring these things in instead. So while in game one, like Knight is kind of one of the critical cards. I shouldn't use that word. Knight is one of the cards that the matchup can revolve around, just because like it can go and get you that Maze of It to stop aggressive creatures, or it can go and just like be bigger than everything else on the side of the board. But in the post sideboard game, you know, you should assume that you're playing against like a Planeswalker control deck. Yeah, so on the D&T side, you want to be playing Cataclysm. Like if you looked at the deck in game one, Cataclysm would be kind of medium against it. But if you keep in mind that like there's going to be 3 more Planeswalkers coming in, it's a much more appealing card. It's also a matchup where like Rest in Peace is pretty solid, because like it stops Punish and Fire recursion, it stops like Loam Cabal Pit recursion, shrinks the Knights that are still around. But it's kind of rough without that. I'm pretty sure you bring in Queen. Let me check my notes. Yeah, you bring in Queen. Yeah, this card is obnoxious to play against. It is extremely powerful. I expect this to see a lot of legacy play in decks that can support the colors. It's just that color combination is kind of rough. So there's not very many decks that you can do it. Like there's there's 4-color Loam that can do it, and I've seen a couple of decks that have like tried to use this color combination specifically to play Queen Marchesa, but those decks always feel kind of medium. All right. I think I've said everything that I want to say tonight. The Loam stuff at the end here was kind of a bonus. Just thought I'd talk about the deck just a tiny bit. I hope you enjoyed tonight's stream, which was kind of more like a podcast, really, than a proper stream. I'll be back with matches on Wednesday. So, did I adjust this with the schedule? No, I didn't adjust this with the schedule yet. Today was kind of busy. So I have Pox queued up for Wednesday, and I need to brew a Wizard Tribal deck for Saturday. I think that Wizard Tribal deck is going to be an Esper control deck that revolves around like Bob, um, like Meddling Mage, Vendilion Click, and a few other like legacy staples of that nature, maybe like Snapcaster Mage. I haven't decided whether or not I'm going like patron wizard levels of deep for the tribal synergies, or whether I'm just going to play like a traditional Esper control deck built around wizards. Like I'm going to have to sit down and actually work out the numbers to see what is a good idea. Yeah, I mean that was the intention of tonight's stream, was like let's run a class in like how do you look at a metagame, how do you build a deck, how do you start thinking about sideboarding, and how do you adjust your deck list on the fly. So I'm going to go ahead and turn you over to Caleb D momentarily, who is streaming some Legacy of some nature. Should be some shenanigans. I hope you enjoyed tonight's stream, and if you enjoyed my content, please follow. I'm doing Legacy 3 times a week on this channel on Monday and Wednesday nights, as well as Saturday mornings. And if you like this content, this sort of content specifically, and you'd like to see more of it in the future, please let me know. Shoot me a tweet on Twitter or something that says, "Hey, I like this," or if you're a part of like our Discord or our Facebook group or something, please just let me know if you like this and this was useful. If it is, I can do this sort of thing again. All right, and if you really like my content, please consider supporting my channel either by subbing to my channel, doing a donation deck list, or doing something else to support me. Thank you for your time, everyone, and good night.